Prior to an election, unions can hold up the Democrats at gunpoint, and the Democrats will just give away the store. That's exactly what just happened with the railroads.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
In response to the news, this is what I want to play a couple of clips, one from a national conservative figure and one from a local one. And I want to get your reaction, Jonah, to how what happened last week is how it's being portrayed in the right-wing press. So, Adam, let's play this clip from Ben Shapiro.
Prior to an election, unions can hold up the Democrats at gunpoint, and the Democrats will just give away the store. That's exactly what just happened with the railroads.
All right, so Shapiro reckons that the workers just got the whole store with this deal. So that's a pretty interesting take. And you know, Jonah, you've been talking to railroad workers about this deal that was struck, the tentative agreement that the workers have to vote on before we can actually say, you know, a strike was really averted. So we'll get your take on that in just a second. But this is our own local shock jock, Dale Jackson, is on WVNN in Huntsville. Let's see what he says about what happened last week.
Is that things will be more expensive if there is a rail strike. That's the moral of the story, although it's not hard to understand. That is what people are talking about. So that's not what we need. Now, Joe Biden, while this union is considering striking and causing many problems here in the United States, Joe Biden sits in the union stronghold of Michigan, as I think 2,000 jobs were announced lost yesterday, looks over to the union folks there and says to them, hey, you guys don't make enough money. Hey, you guys don't get enough credit. Hey, you guys are doing a great job. Bernie Sanders in the United States Senate said, hey, give them whatever they want. So, yeah, we've got an interesting bunch of developments happening here in the United States, and it might be worth noting that there are some concerns, but it looks like we have largely avoided what is happening or what could happen here in the United States. So, again, there were some concerns, and those concerns would impact you because raw materials move on this, gasoline moves on this, so all your consumer goods, all your food, all gasoline, all this stuff could potentially have been impacted by this.
He doesn't lay any of the groundwork like we just did about what the executives are getting and what the workers are putting up with. He doesn't do any of this. The workers got a deal, and Democrats love unions, and probably this isn't going to affect you anymore. That's basically what Jackson's segment said. Jonah, how well do those two segments represent what went on last week?
I mean, you know, it's obviously that's going to be their line, but it just doesn't reflect reality. I mean, what we're talking about is a deal that was set in August, that was recommended, right? And then some workers rejected it, some workers had to think about it. And then there were slight improvements made this week that supposedly got us over the line, right? So the deal itself, I mean, there were not radical changes in there. So there was nothing done on scheduling in either of these deals. The new deal from Thursday that everyone's like, oh, save the day. The only thing it changes about attendance is there's some amount of unpaid sick time. Meaning, another way to say that is, if you get sick and go to the doctor, you will not get fired. You won't get paid, but it won't add to the points. And even that, no one has seen language on what that actually means. If you read the releases from the unions, it basically says for certain procedures, it will be removed from the punitive attendance policy. So there's that. And then the only other thing that people have said is one of the highlights of the deal, again, no one's seen it, is a cap on health insurance premiums, which is just to say, they said if your premium goes over $400 a month, that's the limit. You'll pay $400 a month for your health care minimum. So if that's the store, I don't I don't know what they would prefer rail workers take. The only
Right.
thing that is like, that you could even say positively about the deal is that it has 24% raises over 4 years, but I mean, over 5 years. But if you look at, look at inflation or look at any other union contract, 5% raise a year is just not, this is not a monumental deal. I don't think
That's
anyone
a
would
pay
say
cut.
that. Yeah.
5% raise a year right now is a pay cut. And
Yes.
and that is the largest, that's the biggest thing that they're pointing to. And Ben Shapiro spent a few minutes in his segment on that. Like, oh, wouldn't you love to get a quarter percent, a 25% pay increase or whatever? That's a pay cut. Over 5 years, that's a pay cut. And he is saying that they got the store, that they got the whole store.
But
I would
Jacob,
also
you can have
just-
surgery and not get fired anymore. Like, come on.
Well, it said certain medical procedures. I don't know.
Oh,
So-
right, maybe. Well,
Let's see.
terms and conditions may apply.
Right. I mean, one other thing I would say about the raises thing is, even if there's one way to think about it is like, okay, it's a pay cut. There's another way to think about it of like, is this a specifically great deal? If you look at just Bureau of Labor Statistics data right now, it's estimated that wages are rising at about 5.4%. That's the latest number I saw. So if you're getting with your deal 5%, that's the whole economy. Wages are rising 5.4%. So this isn't even relative to the other workers in the country. This is not a standout knockdown deal. With John Deere last year, it was a big deal that they got immediate 10% raises. It was both a relative increase from the deal they rejected first and got a second better deal. It was also higher than most people were getting in an annual raise at that time, union or not. And it was also above the rest of the economy in terms of, are you catching up with inflation as of, last September or October. This does not on any metric spell like a magnificent raise increase. The thing they keep saying is this is the highest rail workers have gotten a raise since 40 years ago, which incidentally 40 years ago is when inflation was at this point. Right. So it's not, there's no gains here relative to anything else. Now, it's workers' decision if they think that's, is that what they wanted or is it not what they wanted? I don't even have much of a take on that. I just think if you're looking at it economically, if you're looking at it, in any analysis, there's nothing outstanding. This will not go down as a historic rail deal. It'll go down as a historic strike threat, lockout threat, but it won't go down as, nobody's going to be talking about, man, the gains we got in 22. This is not it's not going to change anything. It's not going to be like historic in any way for these workers or for the industry. It's not going to take a cut. It's not going to hurt them that bad, So I just don't think, obviously they got a program to push.
Right. Yeah. And so I want to get what are workers, I want to get what workers are telling you. And then I want to get to that about the lockout, about how the strike narrative is kind of complicated by the actual, by the facts on the ground. I know that you've got a hard out at 10:30, so I want to make sure that we, that we're able to keep moving forward on that. So what are workers telling you? I know that you're getting, you and Max and Mel are really kind of at the forefront of, workers are talking to you, coming to you probably more than anybody else. What are workers telling you about how they feel about this deal?
So I'll just say it's very hard to be honest about polling. What does this mean? You have a vocal group that's going to say, I'm feeling strongly this way or the other. But about, maybe 50 to 100 workers who've said something to me maybe 2 of them have said, I know that I'm voting yes. A really common thing right now is, I have no idea what's in the deal. It doesn't really mean much to say there's some unpaid sick time in the deal. If you can never use it, if it doesn't apply to you, contracts are like legislation, and they're only as useful as they're enforceable. So if it says you can get some unpaid sick time, if that's your contract language, there will be some unpaid sick time. You get 1 day in 5 years of a contract, that's contractually fulfilled. If there's no way to enforce it, if they can deny. One thing I hear from railroad workers all the time is that, yeah, we have this paid time off. They deny it 95% of the time, if you choose X, Y, or Z day. So, I think the main thing people are feeling is we had a strike deadline. We got a deal. We haven't seen the deal. We don't know when we vote on the deal. we don't know when the next strike deadline is if we reject the deal. So, the most thoughtful rail workers I'm talking to, who aren't just in a angry 100% burn it all down mood, which a lot are, is they basically say, like, look, I can't say vote no, I can't say vote yes. None of our leaders have seen it. Literally, it appears from my reporting that national leadership of at least a few of these unions have not seen language on a piece of paper with a signature on it. They've been asking their national unions, can we see it? One of the big unions that was at the bargaining table with the White House, or Secretary of Labor, they put out a release last night, maybe 6 or 7 p.m., that said, if anyone tells you what's in the tentative agreement, they're lying. They haven't seen it. Now, maybe they're accepting their 10-person negotiation team, but it seems like, I don't know what to say. Is the language actually finalized? Did they have a strict deal in the room, or was it just enough to kick off the strike deadline, the lockout deadline? Clearly, part of the deal was the cooling off period is going to extend, but what the actual language is going to be, it's going to make or break it. And the last thing I'll say is, before the new deal on Thursday, when we got up to the brink, what people's sentiment was, there was internal polling at one of the biggest unions said 78% wanted to vote no and risk it with Congress, basically go on strike or lockout if that's what it's going to take. So the question is, 78%, do you swing whatever it is, like 39% of the vote or whatever you need, how many points, do you swing that with unpaid sick time and a cap on healthcare premiums at $400 a month? Right. I don't see that happening, and I don't see it happening for 10 unions that have yet to ratify, right? So there's a whole situation here with how the vote works, but you actually have here 12 different union contracts. And if one of them is not ratified and hits the strike deadline, they can shut down the whole system with one small union. And that is exactly what happened in 1992, which is the last time there was a national shutdown. So when you talk about, is the rail strike over, you're telling me that all of these 12 unions are going to ratify a deal that they were very far from, a day before, just because they got these honestly seemingly pretty small provisions. I don't buy that they can pass a ratification in every one of these unions, just talking to members. And that doesn't mean there's a strike. That's a separate question. You can reject the deal and still be negotiating. But just looking at the math, you're not talking about, can they get majority of the railroad workers to support it? They're talking about all these different contracts, all these different issues, a lot of stuff that wasn't addressed, and a lot of built up frustration and anger at the process of how this went down.
Mm-hmm.
Real quick, I wanted to just clarify. We don't know the current cooling off period. It obviously extended, but we don't know for how long, correct?
We have no idea. I mean, presumably that was part of the deal with Secretary of Labor, is they set a date and said, we're going to announce that. There's been multiple different people have told me from different unions what they think it's going to be, as soon as 2 weeks, as long as December. But there has been no official word of, no strike or lockout until XYZ date. And that's illegal. The reason that matters is because it's actually illegal. Under the Railway Labor Act, you set a cooling off period, and that's enforceable by the law. So it means any action before then would be illegal, which brings us, Jacob, to the proto lockout they did the week leading up to the cooling off period, which was stunning.
Well, explain that to us, because there was, like you said, there were proto lockouts by the companies in anticipation of this deadline. And so what we were, as the whole of the media, even outside of the right wing, the echo chamber people, like, we're talking about Bloomberg, New York Times, all these people are talking about the danger that the workers represent. But we were actually seeing bosses moving in a more serious way towards locking out the workers than we were seeing workers moving in a serious way towards striking. Explain that to us.
Well, something you have to understand is how the Railway Labor Act works is that you have this cooling off period. Once that's over, a strike or a lockout is no longer illegal under federal law, which means that either side, the company or the workers, can initiate basically a rail shutdown. Now, why would the company want to do it? is because historically, under the Rail Labor Act and under rail negotiations, Congress steps in when the rails shut down because it's too much of a national emergency to have the rails not working, that Congress will pass a law. They'll go through both houses of Congress and the president within like 72, 48, 24 hours and pass a law. So the law they're going to pass most likely is going to be based on the recommendations, the Presidential Emergency Board from August, which was the initial recommendations workers were voting on. So if Congress passes it, most likely thing they're going to do is say, you're going back to work under the recommendations that the president's board made in August, which the workers have already said we can't accept. And the carriers,
Right.
the company said we can accept. We're okay with that. So the gamble here from the carriers is basically they think if they can get to a lockout, they can shut down the rails for a short period. Congress will step in and impose the contract that they want, that the unions don't want. And they don't have to bother with these pesky ratification votes or negotiations. It's just over. So they were trying to get to this point. From the workers' perspective, their hope is we can do a strike and it will force the carriers to respond to us, but Congress will stay out or will pass something that's more palatable. They won't just side with the employers. It's a really rare moment where the federal government is directly basically negotiating a union contract. It doesn't happen anywhere else, I mean, except in the federal employees, right? So we, in the week leading up, when Friday is this deadline before which it's illegal to do a strike or lockout, you saw no worker activity in terms of walking off the job, wildcats. I hadn't heard any reports of slowdowns, anything like that. But what you did hear is that rail lines were shutting down operations. Now, they would say there might be a lockout, so we're stopping operations on Tuesday. You know, on Tuesday at noon, we're stopping all Norfolk Southern, a big rail line, shopped all automotive and all intermodal shipments. There was stories of the Biden administration trying to figure out how we're going to get chlorine, hazardous materials that are essential to functioning, how to get chlorine to waste treatment plants just to keep things moving, because the rails were shutting down days before the lockout. Their shutdowns meant that Amtrak had to cancel all these long distance routes. And I had people in the Great Plains in North Dakota saying they hadn't seen a train for days because Amtrak had basically had to shut down because the freight carriers were shutting down, maintenance shutting down, track operations, things like that. So why are they doing that illegally early? Again, they say it's for safety. They say it's for XYZ, but what they want to do is to sort of threaten. This is what a lockout looks like. Look, your economy's slowing down. Congress, you really want to stop car shipments across the whole country? Better step in, better put pressure on the unions to take the deal that's on the table. So that was, to me, scandalous and just another representation of how much power these employers have and how we're relying on, these scrappy working class people to stand up to the most powerful corporation in the country to say, this system isn't working. We desperately need to change something.
Are we expecting that these companies and the people responsible for those for those decisions being made, are we expecting that they are going to be held accountable for breaking the law? I mean, if we saw this on the other end, if we saw unions going out there from the top, not even wildcat strikes are a little bit different and they're maybe a little bit more difficult to hold a union accountable for. But if you get from the top a union going on strike illegally, you could very well be looking at bankrupting a union. All of the fines that would be incurred. Are we expecting anything like that to come to these companies?
Sure, fines, and I don't know the specifics of the Railway Labor Act, but also things like you lose the right to bargain. Like you could just basically, your union no longer exists. There are legal penalties in different jurisdictions. Again, Rail Labor Act, a lawyer could tell you, but serious implications. And I haven't seen anything filed, anything, I don't know what Pete Buttigieg is doing with the Department of Transportation, but you just had, some CEOs and executives shut down. Maybe it was 5%, maybe it was 10%, maybe 15% of the rail system in this country, specifically for a political gain.
Right.
To say, we don't want to do the sick days, so we're going to give you a taste of what this is going to look like under a legal period where it's stated by presidential action, there can be no lockout or stoppage or anything like that. Now, it's just a microcosm of how much power we give corporations to just decide what happens, right? The workers have no say in the operations. And they just basically just say, Here's what's happening at work today. No car shipments. You can sit in the garage. We're not locking you out technically because you're coming in. We'll still pay you. That's nothing for us. But we're locking out basically the U.S. economy.
Insane. And so we're not. You wouldn't even know what the potential penalties would be for these companies, even if someone were to be interested in holding them accountable.
Sure, and I can't imagine, their corporate legal team, I'm sure, is half ex-government officials anyway who work for the surface transportation people. So, I don't know. I would love to see someone bring at least some sort of, put a bill in Congress to prosecute this.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.